we've got here is failure to communicate. Some men you just can't reach. So you get what we had here last week, which is the way he wants it. Well, he gets it. And I don't like it any more than you men.
Okay, that might have been a bit dramatic, but I do want to do a comparison between the Levo SL and the Rise. They're the two only real bikes in this underserved, low-powered, lightweight e-bike category. Both of these bikes have models that fall within that 36 to 42 pound range versus the big 50 plus pounders that most brands are doing. The power on these motors are a bit lower, but for a lot of people, I think they're enough to take the sting off the climb and give the ability for the rider to have a bit more agility on the way down. So let's take a look at the Levo SL versus the Rise. Okay, let's start with models. The Levo SL has 4 models to choose from, starting at the pretty crazy $10,200 Canadian and going all the way up to the batshit crazy $19,400. The Rise has 7 models to choose from. It starts at a pretty crazy $8,000 Canadian and goes up to the batshit crazy territory of $16,600 Canadian. Both offer models with carbon and aluminum frames. First, let's take a look at geometry. We'll use size medium frames when making the comparisons, and we'll use numbers based on 150mm forks. The Rise is a little bit longer, with a 450mm reach and a stack of 613. The Levo, on the other hand, has a reach of 435mm and a stack of 606. Given the same cockpit setup, the Rise will have a slightly longer rad. The Rise also has a slightly longer wheelbase at 1205, with the Levo coming in at 1185. Both bikes share a very similar head tube angle. The Rise comes in at 65.5 degrees, with the Levo coming in at 66 degrees. The Rise, however, does have a steeper effective seat tube angle at 76.5 degrees compared to the Levo at 74.6 degrees. The Levo sits a little higher with a bottom bracket of 348mm, with the Rise sitting a little lower at 336mm. Okay, so what do these numbers point towards? I think the extra 10mm of rear travel on the Levo will give the rider an extra little bit of cushion on the bumpy sections and big drops. The steeper effective seat tube angle on the Rise should make it a slightly better climber. The added reach, wheelbase, and slightly lower bottom bracket of the Rise might give it a little extra feeling of stability on the really steep sections. Other than that, these two bikes are pretty darn similar. Okay, let's take a look at the motors. Specialized decided to make their own in-house motor for the Levo SL, and they produced one that has 35 Nm of torque. Orbea, on the other hand, decided to utilize the Shimano EP8 motor with a custom firmware update that they call the RS version, or the Rider Synergy version. That motor has 60 Nm of torque with the firmware update, as opposed to 85 Nm on the standard EP8 motor. Full-sized e-bikes tend to have torques at around 85 to 110 Nm. With its 60 Nm of torque, the Rise will have noticeably more power than the Levo SL. As for batteries to power that motor, the Levo SL comes in with one at 320 watt-hours. The Rise has a very similar 360 watt-hour battery for its carbon version. However, for the aluminum version, the battery bumps up to 540 watt-hours, assumably to compensate for its higher weight. I've only ever ridden the Rise, but I do have a few friends who have ridden both, and from what they've said, the Levo SL does have more of a whine to it on the ascents. It's a bit louder on the climbs. The EP8 motor on the Rise is pretty quiet when you're climbing. However, on the down, the Rise does have a rattle to it. It kind of shakes around in the rougher sections and you can't hear it. It doesn't bug me in the slightest, but it is there. One thing I really appreciate about the Rise, and I've heard it from others as well, is just how natural the pedal feel is. it really makes you feel like you just have some added strength in your legs. It doesn't feel incredibly artificial. It doesn't blast off when you put down the pedals. I think that firmware update for the RS version really helps with that. But again, I've never tried the Levo SL, so I just don't know how it compares. It would be really cool to do a back-to-back to see if you can really feel the difference there. So what's my overall take between the two? Again, I've never ridden the Levo SL, and I'm a huge fan of the Rise. But based on the specs on paper, I do think the Rise has an edge. I think it's probably going to be a little bit better of a climber with a steeper seat tube angle and a little bit more power in that motor. I think it's going to be a little bit quieter, and you're not going to hear that humming whine on the climb that you might hear with the Levo SL. I think the Levo SL will feel a bit more plush on the bumpy sections or on the huck to flats or big jumps, but I think the modern geometry on the Rise will give it extra confidence overall on the downhill sections. Although if we're talking about modern geo for downhill sections, we'd probably want to take a look at the Kenevo SL, the bigger brother of the Levo SL, that's more of an enduro-focused bike. It has 170 millimeters of travel both front and rear, comes in with a 63.5 degree head tube angle, and 460 millimeters of reach on the size medium. But if we're going to compare that one, we'd probably take one of the Orbea Rise mods with a 160 fork, 160 rear travel, that also has 64 degree head tube angle and is way more of an enduro setup. But that is for another day.